Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today I am going to be talking about my favorite films of 2018. I wanted to see as many films as I could possibly see this year so that this list was a bigger list and felt a little bit more complete, because last year's list was not as... it didn't feel as complete to me. There's a lot of movies that on there. There's movies that are on that list I still love. There's just a lot more films that fit into other slots, and I've expanded my thoughts and feelings on those movies. But now, I feel like I have a pretty solid list for this year. I have 10 films that I want to talk to you guys about that were my personal favorites, and I have a few honorable mentions. Something I want to stress. This is my personal favorites list. This is not necessarily what I consider to be the best films of 2018, although these movies I do consider to be higher quality. I consider them to be objectively really good films. I don't consider them all to be the best films of the year. That's why I'm not titling this the best films of 2018. I don't want to steer you guys down that direction. Now, of the 25 films that I did see this year, there were actually quite a few I really enjoyed. There was a lot that I seeked out and I found very, very interesting. There weren't a lot of films I found to be disappointing. I'd like to mention the ones that I wanted to see and the ones that have me most excited that I didn't get a chance to see during this year. So, here they are. Incredibles 2, The Favorite, Black Klansman, Green Book, The Wife, First Man, Mary Queen of Scots, The Mule, Sicario 2, Upgrade, Bad Times at the El Royale, and Halloween 2018. To qualify for the honorable mentions for me, the movies I picked were movies that I said, even though they're not in the top tier of my favorites list, these are movies I could definitely see myself watching again, revisiting. And the movies I kept off were unfortunately ones that I found that they have some issues that when I have, at least at this moment personally, they have issues where I'm just like, I can't really get past that. Going from descending upwards, these are the movies that I just couldn't put on my top 10. 8th Grade, Ballad of Buster Scruggs, Revenge, You Were Never Really Here, Annihilation, and Avengers Infinity War. Let's get started with the top 10. Number 10 is Thoroughbreds. Now, this was a movie that when I was hearing about it, I was curious by name alone. This is one where the name just grabbed me. I was like, okay, I gotta try to find this movie. Before the year was over, I was able to see it on Telus for free, and I was like, perfect, I'll just sit down and watch it. And watching the movie, I was starting to slowly kind of grasp what the film was about. I was trying to follow the story, and I wasn't 100% sure what the script was trying to do, what the story was kind of doing. I was a little bit lost. However, as the movie progressed, I was still on board, and I was never bored by the film. I was never feeling like it was too pretentious. And the thing is, like, the dialogue is very, like, kind of, it seems like it's on the nose, or it's trying to infuse meaning with its title to make you understand what Thoroughbreds means. It never pulled me out of the experience because the performers in this movie, the actors, the actresses are all phenomenal, especially the two leads. I think they work expertly off of each other. They give each other so much. They never fall into just stereotypes with their characters, which could be so easy for both of these people, and yet the actresses know how to infuse their characters with enough intrigue and with enough passion, and they understand how to make these characters not just archetypes or stereotypes, and that was what I really loved, especially when it comes to the side characters. There's a character who has to play a drug dealer, and he's unfortunately I forget the actor's name, but he was in Star Trek, and he passed away this last year or 2 years ago. He gives this character so many like cool layers, like he's tough, but he's also kind of insecure about himself, and I love that. Those actors throughout made me stay on board, and the ending is excellent. It's one of those things where that made me reconsider the entire movie and what it was about, and that was the reason why I can see myself revisiting this film. I was very, very impressed with this movie. Now, number 9, 8, and 7 respectively, I'm going to talk about all in one because they're the comic book movies I made it on my list. In this order: Deadpool 2, Black Panther, and Into the Spider-Verse. Now, Deadpool 2 is on here strictly for enjoyment's sake. I never thought I could actually care about Deadpool. After the first Deadpool movie, I liked that movie fine. I think it's a great origin story film. I think it sets up the character very well. But I never once cared for Deadpool. I never once cared too much about him. I loved the performance, didn't care about him as a person. And you've seen my review for both these movies. You know how I felt about that. And this movie made me care immensely. I love the idea that Deadpool is struggling with being invincible and wanting to die in this movie. I love the side characters. I love how they've all grown up from the first movie. It is such a good sequel to the film that was already considered by many to be an excellent film, like a perfect origin story film. And for me, this took it to the next level. I actually enjoy this one more than the first one. Now, Black Panther's on this list because seeing it again, as I saw it in the beginning of the year and then I saw it again near the end. I was almost done with comic book movies. When I was, 2 years ago, I basically said, oh, comic book movies are so cliche, so awful. They're just the worst thing that has ever been pumped out of Hollywood and blah, blah, blah. I was that kid. And then Black Panther came out and I found a love for comic book movies that I hadn't felt in any film this year. I felt this spiritualness, this level of tradition in this movie. The culture that Wakanda has is so rich. A lot of people said that this was just like a normal, comic book movie. It's like a normal origin story, but I don't agree with that necessarily because I find that what we're discovering more of, what we're just really discovering in this movie is not necessarily T'Challa, because we've been introduced to him in Civil War. What we're actually being introduced to is Wakanda. We're being introduced to the culture. We're being introduced to the people, the tradition. We understand the severity. I understand the severity of a lot of this world and what it means to them to be closed off. I understand that mindset. That, to me, similar to the movie Crazy Rich Asians this last year, I felt this tremendous amount of tradition and just the importance of it, without it seeming like it was just a plot device to make the characters feel at odds. It genuinely felt organic and it felt very spiritual, and that communicated to me on a very personal level. What I really love in this movie, however, is Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger. And I love his worldview about how he was raised in violence. And while he has a simple understanding of Wakanda, like it's the most powerful place on the world, and what he wants to do is come to this place and use the tradition of that culture, use the culture of Wakanda that he only kind of understands, but not really understand the core of it, and coming around it and trying to take that culture away and bring it down to the basis of just like violence and destruction. The only reason it's lower on my list is because I don't feel much for the fight between the Wakandans. I feel for the fight between T'Challa and Killmonger, despite the fact that it is one of the more CGI fights of the film. I still care about that fight. It's just the fight between the Wakandans at the end that I'm just kind of like, I don't feel concerned. I feel it's not like the fight in Infinity War that takes place in Wakanda. This fight, I didn't feel necessarily anything was being gained or lost. It was fine. The characters in it were great, but it just wasn't, the stakes overall didn't hit me. But Into the Spider-Verse is ahead of that because this was the last film I saw this year. And I was just thoroughly impressed. I couldn't imagine what I was seeing. I have a huge issue when it comes to just having to drop into comic books. I don't like reading Marvel or DC comics or any comics really, to be honest, because the multiverse worlds of these things just get on my mind and just bog me down, and I just get headaches from it. I don't enjoy reading it because if I want to have a conversation about it or say, I really like this one comic, and I felt this about this character and blah, 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 then somebody will come around and say, oh, have you read this one? This universe that they are in, there's this universe that comes around here, and they tie it all in, and it's like this version of this person is very different. And that kind of conversation just makes me feel like an outsider. I just don't feel connected with it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to do like 50, 70 years of history before I can even feel like I'm a part of this culture. Into the Spider-Verse took the multiverse worldview, that those kinds of characters, it made me realize just how interesting they are and how important they are. But I also realized that what the core behind those characters are. Spider-Man, I think, was the perfect character for this because Spider-Man has the best and most inspiring core of any superhero. His origin story is one that they even joke about in this movie a lot, and they talk about the tragedy behind it and the inventiveness behind the character, and that's something I loved, and I connected with that so much because it came down basically to the core of that character, of that origin throughout the whole film. And it reinvigorated this love of this character that I never necessarily considered to be my favorite superhero, but I started to understand throughout the importance of Spider-Man. And I started I laughed so hard with this movie. The jokes are excellent. The story is really, it rounds all the it gets all the bases when it comes to trying to empathize with your hero and your villain, and it never once felt dull. And the animation is phenomenal. I have never seen a movie that was so busy and yet I could take on every single element. It's a little bit like Loving Vincent, except this movie has the better story. This is kind of what I'm talking about back in my Loving Vincent review about I felt like the story was simple, but the animation was big and it was grand and impressive. This movie has the great animation, but the amazing story behind it. And while I will say I was very tired during this movie, it wore me down from all that was happening. I still wanted to go on the ride, and the ending. This movie has my favorite end credit sequence of the entire year. It was perfect. It was hilarious. And this was just such an original and unique animated film, and I loved it for that. I love the risks they took with this movie. Now, number 6 on my list is another inventive film, and it is Sorry to Bother You. The reason I picked Sorry to Bother You above Spider-Verse is I think it has to do with the story itself. Into the Spider-Verse is a very complex story and with a very, working of it, like you could get lost with it. However, they take the risks and everything to make it that fit the story, and that's what makes it so good. Sorry to Bother You is a very simple story, a very simple concept. It's a rags to riches story. It's one that we all know. We all kind of understand this kind of narrative, and it could have been just so boring and so like just something you could just throw away. And Boots Riley does such an amazing job with his direction. Every single performance in this movie, Lakeith Stanfield, Stephen Yeun, Tessa Thompson, every single person, Armie Hammer, every actor in this movie is giving it their all and infusing these characters with just so much depth, and it's not getting talked about enough. I think this movie is so interesting and so expressive. Even the music, I know I talked a little bit about the music, but the music in this movie was just staying with me the entire time. And I love that. I love when a movie is just in me for a long period of time after I've seen it. There was no part of this where I was just like saying, oh, I'm bored by this. I said in my review that there's one element of the story I don't think works very well. I think it doesn't do anything for the film. It's just kind of there. And I still stand by that. That's unfortunately one of the things I usually consider when it comes to making a movie, considering it the best film of the year. But for a personal film, I have no problem putting this on my favorites list. This is a movie I will be revisiting again and again. Now, number 5 is a little bit different. Number 5 is kind of stepping away from the more extravagant expression, and it's going into just what warms my heart. Number 5 is Paddington 2. I saw the first Paddington movie a few days ago, actually. And we'd never seen it before, and I saw it, and it was just delightful. It was a funny movie. I laughed at the parts where my brothers were laughing, when my mom was laughing. This was just a great family movie, and I've been waiting to see something like this for a long time. Something like Paddington it made me feel good, and it had a really very dark villain, which I absolutely love. It never shies away from that. There was one element that I wasn't a huge fan of, and that was like the normal, oh, this is a stranger in our house kind of storyline. You know, whatever. I get that kind of thing. It makes sense. Nothing I can detract from the film. It's something I'm a little bit for. Paddington 2, in my opinion, is a better movie than the first one because it takes that generalized concept of this is a stranger on our house. And what it does now is the main human characters in the family are now dealing with their own personal crises, and they're having their own personal problems. The dad is having a midlife crisis. The mom is having a midlife crisis. The kids are trying to be cool and trying to express themselves, but they're really confused and conflicted with who they are. Throughout the movie, they're always dealing with their own problems while the film is going on, and that's where most of the humor is, and I love that. And Paddington's story is actually kind of like surprisingly dark. Like what he goes through in this movie is like, oh my gosh, but it never loses its politeness and its cheeriness and the warm-heartedness. It's just a lovely movie and a funny movie. We watched this movie the day after we saw Paddington, and the jokes rang clearer. They were just so much fun. Hugh Grant in this film, phenomenal. My mom loves Hugh Grant, and I've always thought of Hugh Grant as like that one character in most like romantic comedies. He's got range in this movie, and he is so funny. I loved Paddington 2, and I will absolutely be seeing this film down the road from this moment on. It is so good. Now, number 4 on my list is very different from Paddington 2. It is not the polite, loving story of the bear with the family and going through that. It's Creed 2, a movie that is straight up a hard, revenge-driven, emotional story. It is tough. As a fan of the Rocky franchise, and as somebody who does look at the films and saying what films in this franchise are the best movies and which ones detract from the Rocky story and the Rocky name, this is one I absolutely think upholds both Rocky and Creed, and even the Drago name. I went a little overboard in my Creed 2 review, saying that it makes Rocky 4 a good movie. Yeah, the Rocky 4's got a lot of problems with it. But I stand by this. What it does is it takes that dramatic punch of what happens to Apollo Creed, and it carries with it and brings so much depth to that moment in the Rocky franchise. And it also takes Ivan Drago, the Drago name itself, and brings it to another level. It brings it to the highest level it can possibly go. It turns a complete 180 of itself. It's not just a movie that's trying to come against communism and all that. It's a movie with an empathetical villain. And in my opinion, Michael B. Jordan gives his best performance of the year, in a year where he was like Killmonger, and I'm not sure what else he was in this year, but he kills this performance. Maybe kills is the wrong word, but he's just embracing this performance. Full on. Every single actor in this movie is so great. I don't know what else to say aside from it just makes me... I was so glad that this was the movie I was most anticipating this year, because I was not disappointed in the slightest. It is a excellent film, and I encourage you guys to see it after you see all the other Rocky films. Now, number 3 is another shift. Number 3 is Won't You Be My Neighbor? This is the story of Fred Rogers, and this came at a time for me where I feel it is most important to see this movie. Because I feel like nowadays, in our culture, we have a tendency to not want to listen to each other, and we don't necessarily consider the ramifications of our actions. We don't consider the consequences of what we do. We don't consider that what we say, what we post, what we think, and how we feel and how we express it, we don't consider that it has an impact. And sometimes we don't care. We don't care about the impact we make. And this movie, for me, is the expression of one man's just desire to do good for kids, to treat kids with respect, to treat them as thinking people and not just lesser beings, to not try to force his own agenda onto people and try to make his own like legacy of how he feels to spread throughout the world. He just wanted to teach kids about the facts of life, the truths of life. He wanted kids to love each other and to embrace each other, not to reject each other, not to hate because you can, not to spread hatred. Like, he wanted kids just to be kids, and not to worry about the violence and the conflict of the world outside of it. He wanted them to understand it, but he wanted them to make their own minds up. You know, we take advantage of that. We take advantage of our power over children. There's so many other documentaries I've seen, but this was the first time I was just like, this is one I need to revisit, and this is one I need to relook at and re-examine, and it's a movie I use to recharge, and just to bring this positivity back into my own life. And there's so much also in the filmmaking, the assembly of this movie that I love. But more to the point, it's that core message of just this one person expressing himself in his most positive way, in his best way, just to give kids an education on how to just be kids. Oh boy, these last two, you're going to be seeing these last two films a lot. Number 2 is A Star Is Born. And this movie, I've done a review on it. I've talked a lot about this movie. I love everything about this movie. There's a lot of scenes in this movie that just kind of hit me on the right level. And it's not a movie that's just trying to be a big show-off piece of celebrities and stars just trying to go for an Oscar or try to go for awards. I mean, it will get a lot of Oscars. It will get a lot of awards. I don't mind that, because this movie at its core is the story of just two people who are both lost in life, and they find each other, and they try to live the lives that both people have had before. They're both sharing their lives and their experiences, and they're growing together. They're evolving with each other. This is a movie I just see and I'm like, that's connects to me so deeply. It's like, that's what I would love to have. And it just doesn't make me, I'm not tired with it. I'm not tired with this story. I think Bradley Cooper, he impressed me the most with his direction this year. The thing that I connected with the most is watching interviews with Lady Gaga and Sam Elliott, hearing how much they put their trust into Bradley, and how much Bradley Cooper just, he needed that trust from everyone on screen and off. And those moments, when I hear that, a tremendous amount of respect just for Bradley Cooper. I've learned so much more about Lady Gaga as a person, and she is just she's a celebrity that I actually really respect as well. And Sam Elliott, his performance in this is not getting a lot of acknowledgement, which really surprises me. But he's excellent. He's absolutely perfect for this film, and there's nothing outside of it that I can say except I want to see this movie again, and I want to just experience the journey of these characters again. It just feels complete to me, but the kind of complete where you can still like revisit and re-explore and interpret, and that's what I love. I don't love movies that just close themselves off. I also don't love movies that are just completely separate from the audience. This movie, it was excellent, and I connected with every single moment of it. Now, the number 1 movie, I said something about this movie a while back. I reviewed it, and this is something I said. I'm picking it apart in pieces in my head, and I'm like, no, the more I think about it, the more that makes sense. And the more it makes sense, the more it makes me angry, because I don't know if I want to own this movie or not. But if I don't, what am I saying? That it was so terrifying I can't see it again? Such a great movie, it doesn't deserve to be watched later in life? Later on? What does that mean? I'm conflicted and confused. Yeah. This was a Christmas present for my brother, and I'm very thankful he got it for me. Number 1 is Hereditary. Seeing it again, I knew it was great. But no film out of any other film from April to now, January of 2019, left me with an impact of just awe. Like, I couldn't believe just how excellent this movie was when I first saw it. And I was confused. And the complaint I had in my review, I detract that. Like, I think I mentioned something about I don't know how it mixed, modern day horror with artsy horror. Like, that was garbage, whatever the hell I said. The expression throughout the film, just what's going on in this movie is so good. I love it so much. Not just as a horror film, but just as a regular movie. The performance in this movie, Toni Collette is excellent. It's so interesting because she's giving so much and she's expressing so much, but she isn't necessarily just going, I'm going for this performance. I'm struggling. I'm pulling and reaching so much. She's going through so much, and yet it feels so natural to her. Every actor is. Alex Wolff, he is just perfect in this movie as Peter. When he's acting with Toni Collette, those moments in the movie are just where I go, yes, brilliant, perfect. No, don't take anything away from that. And every moment when they are acting with anyone, every single actor in this movie is perfect. Gabriel Bryan is excellent in this movie. Millie Shapiro is great in this movie. I stand by the positives I gave it in my review. And the thing that made me realize that this is my favorite list, my number 1 favorite, is because it sets me up perfectly when it comes to setting mood, making me have personal reactions to what's going on, making me just connect with the filmmaking on display, and just personally me just loving every second of this. Despite the fact that it is a very terrifying horror film and it's very upsetting, I can't deny it. This is the movie I love. This is the movie that this year that I will be seeing the most out of any film out of this year again and again. And bravo, Ari Aster. Your first big film debut, and you knocked it out of the park, man. You knocked it out of the park. Every single member of your production crew, your sound crew, the score, just everything. Bravo. Bravo. I love it. And it's well deserved on top of a list of movies that I absolutely loved this year. Well, ladies and gentlemen, those are my favorite films of 2018. It has been an excellent year, and I'm so glad I got a chance to share this all with you. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite films of 2018 were. Like, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and absolutely share with your friends. And as always, take care, you guys.